Cell Sleeper. Simon is a prisoner at a correctional facility going on 5 years. He has been convicted of tax fraud and has 2 more years in his sentence, one with good behavior. We meet Simon during visiting hours, but he is sitting alone. This is not strange to him. He figures that his long-estranged girlfriend set the appointment, trying to muster the courage to see him, but she never follows through with the visitation. He sits and waits, listening to some commotion down the row of booths. A prisoner and his wife are arguing loudly. The man storms away and leaves the woman alone. She walks off distressed, but notices Simon's empty booth and joins him. She introduces herself as Sarah, and she is strangely familiar to Simon. She describes her shaky relationship with her husband, Lance, and that he will be released from prison very soon. She has been pushing for a divorce for some time, and he has refused. She fears for her life now that he will soon be released. She asks Simon if he knows her husband, and he says yes, they are only a few cells apart. She wants to know everything he knows about Lance, which isn't a lot. Simon returns to his cell, noticeably changed by his interaction with Sarah. A few days later, Simon receives another visitation request and finds Sarah waiting to speak with him. Simon says that she is familiar, and that he can't get her out of his head. She admits to the same thing. The conversation comes back to Sarah's husband. She asks the important question, will he kill her husband for her? Right away he refuses, even though he has intimate feelings for the girl. She offers him money, but he walks off. They continue to meet each other over the next few days. Sarah never mentions her proposition again. During their meetings, they talk about Simon's release in under a year and the new life they will start together. Simon meets Sarah's husband, Lance, in the gym and seriously thinks about murder. Without Lance, Simon's life with Sarah would be much less complicated. He doesn't go through with it, but starts planning the perfect murder. Simon meets Sarah during visiting hours, but notices that Lance is there as well, sitting at an empty booth a few rows away. Lance spots the two of them together and reacts with hostility. Sarah bolts, and Simon returns to his cell, now fearing for his life. Simon prepares to defend himself, and he uses his group of friends as protection. They march outside into the courtyard for recreation, and his friends betray him, swayed under the influence of Lance and his gang. Simon is now left alone, and Lance appears out of the crowd of people, wielding a knife. Simon screams, and Lance disappears before his eyes. No one else sees it, but Lance is gone. Simon is afraid that he is losing his grip. No one seems to care that Lance has disappeared. Lance's cell is occupied again, and whenever Simon mentions Lance's name to someone, he receives a confused stare. It is as if Lance never existed at all. Worse yet, Sarah has not come to visit him, and he worries for her safety. Maybe Lance was released after all and found her. After the altercation with Lance, Simon notices little inconsistencies in his day-to-day. He explains this all to the prison shrink, Dr. Labarge. 1 second it's daylight and the next it's night. He experiences large memory gaps in time, almost like a dream. Simon tells Dr. Labarge exactly that. He believes he is in a dream. Why else would Lance disappear right in front of him? How else could he explain all the weird reality flaws? Simon can't remember what crime he committed anymore. He can't even remember the name of his old girlfriend. He can only think of Sarah. All Simon wants to do is wake up, but can't figure out how. The doctor proposes that he is suicidal and that waking up is another way of killing oneself. Simon realizes that he may be right. The only way to wake up is to die. The doctor puts him on suicide watch, and a guard stands in front of his cell all night. That night, Simon dreams that he can walk right out of his cell. After waking, he takes it as a sign to finally embrace his dream reality. As a test, he disappears the guard outside his cell. Simon then walks through his cell door like a ghost and transports himself to Sarah's house. He knows he is in a dream and that Sarah may not be real, but he wants to confront her one last time. He finds her at her house, and she pulls a gun on him, frightful of his intrusion into her home. He tries to console her, telling her that Lance is dead, but she already knows this. He wonders how, and then figures it out. She's scheduled a visitation with both Simon and Lance at the same time. This way, Lance would see them together and try to kill Simon. Simon would either have to kill or be killed. Simon is angered at being used and moves to attack her. Thinking that he is invincible in his dream world, she shoots him in the head and he dies. Simon wakes up in a hospital bed, connected to wires and other medical instruments. Dr. Labarge hovers over him, dressed in white surgical gear. The other medical professionals in the room are distressed that Simon is awake, and they strip him of all his tubes and appendages. Disoriented, Simon looks around the room, which is just a cupboard, barely bigger than a prison cell. As he sits up, Labarge explains everything to him. Simon has been sentenced to life imprisonment for murder. He was charged of killing a woman named Sarah. Simon does not remember this and refuses to believe it. Labarge says that memory loss is common and it should return in time. This is the future, and incarceration is a little different. To avoid overcrowded prisons and prison violence, all prisoners are now put to sleep for the entirety of their sentence and are provided with a dream framework to live in, where they may go about normal lives in a hyper-real dream world. Labarge insists that this is much more humane for the prisoner, where even a criminal is able to live a full, meaningful life. But sometimes the sleepers wake up too early, like Simon. Sarah, Lance, and everything else had been a dream, structured to distract him while he did his time. Simon tells the doctor that he was in prison, even in the dream world, and Labarge says that is common for the sleeping prisoner to fall into his same destructive patterns. Now that Simon is awake, it is impossible to put him back to sleep, so they take him to the Wakers' barracks, where all the waking prisoners are sent. The barracks are cold and sterile. Simon is given his own cell the size of a cupboard. There are no human guards in the barracks. Everything is run on machine. Robots bring him his meals, and he eats right there in his cell. He never sees the other prisoners, but the cells are so close he can hear them talking to each other. Simon tells them his story. He is now torn between two realities. He refuses to believe that he could have killed Sarah, especially when it was her that shot him. He assures himself that he is part of some conspiracy. The dream world was the true reality, and someone must have drugged him. He decides that Labarge is behind it all. Simon hallucinated Lance's disappearance and every other inconsistency. After being shot, he was taken to this horrible prison to die. He was framed for Sarah's murder, probably to protect her. She is the true criminal. The prisoner in the next cell strikes up a relationship with Simon. He tells Simon he is wrong. The prison is just another dream. The prisoners in the barracks believe they are one step closer to discovering the true reality. But the only way to move on from this dream is to die. The prisoners are all staging a mass suicide now that they have the proper weapon. The first day of every month, the prisoners are moved from their cells to go outside while their cells are cleaned. There, in the courtyard, they will murder each other and move on to the next reality. Simon is horrified by this idea, knowing that he will likely be killed, whether he agrees to their philosophy or not. Labarge sends for him, and they meet in an office. He follows up, asking Simon if he remembers anything about Sarah. Simon is still confident that he did not murder her and demands to be set free. He tells Labarge about the other prisoners and their plot to kill each other. Labarge shows no concern. Labarge asks him if he believes he is in a dream. Simon says no. Everything seems too real, and he does not want to die. Simon begs for protection from the prisoners, but Labarge won't help him until he realizes the reality of his crime. He must admit that he killed Sarah. Simon still refuses to believe it. He is sent back to his cell, defeated. Later, Simon's next-door neighbor strikes up a new conversation. He finally tells him his name is Lance. Simon is shocked and wonders if it is the same Lance that was married to Sarah. Lance tells him the whole story. He was married to a woman named Sarah, whom he learned was having an affair with a guy named Simon. Lance caught the two of them together in bed and attacked Simon. There was a scuffle, and in the confusion, Sarah was killed, seemingly by both of them. As Lance tried to revive his dead wife, Simon ran, later to be picked up by the police. A few months later, Lance was picked up for also killing Sarah, landing him in the same prison as Simon. Simon is shaken by this news, but does not have the memory to prove the story. But that night, he has several strange dreams of the scuffle with Lance and Sarah. He meets with Labarge and mentions the dreams. Labarge confirms that Simon is ready to know the truth. The doctor plays a tape recording of Simon's voice. It is Simon's confession to the crime. Every prisoner records his confession before going to sleep to preserve the memories they will lose. Simon is shocked to hear the entire story. His affair with Sarah lasted for some time, but Sarah was hesitant to break off her marriage with Lance. Simon decided he needed to act. He set up a scenario where Lance would find out about their affair. Lance would then divorce Sarah and allow them to be together. The plan backfired and Lance discovered both of them in bed. Labarge stops the tape before it can finish and Simon wonders why. Still, Simon admits to his crimes and Labarge offers to help him. He will not release the prisoners from their cells. The first day of the month, all the prisoners are preparing for their end, but they aren't released. The prisoners react with anger. There is a large-scale prison riot in the barracks and all the prisoners escape. Lance opens Simon's cell and drags him out. They all march into a courtyard where a single weapon, a kitchen knife, is passed around. With Simon held against his will, they set up for the ritual. Lance appoints himself as the executioner and takes volunteers. After all the prisoners are dead, he brings the knife to Simon's throat. It is then that he recognizes him as the man who killed his wife, and he reacts with new hatred. Simon pauses and reminds himself that he is in a dream. Sarah never really existed, and neither does Lance. He tells Simon that there's no harm done and offers Simon the knife. Simon seriously considers it, but decides not to kill Lance. Lance smiles and then slits his own throat right in front of him. Simon is left alone in the courtyard of bodies. After almost dying, he knows he is in reality. Labarge finds Simon and they return to the doctor's office. Simon is so traumatized that Labarge gives him some medication and tells him to lie down. Before slipping into sleep, Labarge plays him the rest of the taped confession. Simon's voice explains that Lance later killed himself after his wife died. This means that Lance never made it to the prison, and therefore never died in the courtyard. As Simon puzzles over this, the doctor tells him he can wake up. Simon wakes up in a psychiatrist's office with Labarge. The doctor tells him that he has successfully passed the procedure and is ready to return to society. He explains the exercise. This is still the future, but criminals are not locked up. They are brought to a psychiatrist who puts them under a deep hypnosis. He takes them through different levels of dream reality where the patient must realize the error of his crime. In Simon's case, he accidentally murdered his lover, Sarah. The doctor had guided him into the first reality, where the roles had been reversed. Instead of killing Sarah, she had killed him. This way, the patient can experience his own crime from the victim's point of view. In the second reality, Simon had to confront the reality of his crime. He had to honestly admit to what he did and recognize the dream as truth, which Simon did. Also, when given the option of finally murdering the man that caused Sarah's death, he had refused, completing the procedure. Simon had only been under hypnosis for an hour, and is completely rehabilitated. Now he is ready to return to his normal life, but his memory of the crime will have to be cleared. He will now go out into the world as a blank slate, but will still carry all that he learned in his subconscious. Simon is put under hypnosis once more and wakes up a new man. We meet Simon one last time, sitting down at a coffee shop. He is reading the newspaper when a woman walks in through the door. We recognize her as Sarah. Simon is infatuated with her right away, and they make eye contact. She smiles at him and he smiles back.